Hello, I'm making this video to show you how you can start your apps. There are several ways to do it. Now, when you are dealing with something that is not Express related, you are very unlikely to want to keep it running after you sign out of the Power server. Every time you close a PuTTY session, it will automatically close whatever node program you are running. So for stuff that is usually that we put into the samples folder where it doesn't really serve the web in any way, you can just note it. So right here, I got a few sample programs, and you typically just say mdb test, in this case, sync.js, and then press the enter key. The program ran and it exits all by itself. So this is the easiest way to run a particular node app, but it doesn't persist. Now, next, let's go check out some of the Express programs that we have written. So we'll first go ahead and visit express.debug, which is where your sandbox is located. Now, of all of these apps here, only one can be running at any particular time because each one wants to grab the port that is in the .port file, which in this case is 41320. So only one app can be running at any particular time, but this time you may want to run the app a little bit longer than your actual SSH session, because you might want to get back to test the script a little bit later on, and you may not want to restart the app. So the first thing I want to show is how do you know whether PM2 is Process Manager 2, basically that's the name of PM2, whether it is already having one of your apps up and running. So you do a Pm2 status, and we reflect that just the production app is running, but the sandbox app is not running. So we can go ahead and start a sandbox app, and once again, the easiest way to do it is just to use node. This will basically start the app, and in a way where when you exit the SSH session, the app will automatically terminate. I think I illustrated this before, but I can do it again today. So now we have the app running, and this one is the one that tested that would delay by 3 seconds before responding. So let's go ahead and check it out. Let me show you the URL. There we go. All right. So this one is in my sandbox. So it's going to be in Express, and then my login name .debug, and I believe the endpoint is just the root of the entire thing. So now I press the enter key. It delayed by 3 seconds, and then it responds. Okay, so that works, right? So now we go back to this terminal here, and I'm gonna forcibly terminate this particular terminal session, which is equivalent of closing PuTTY. Or if you're using Mac OS, you can basically just force close the entire terminal. So I'm going to close the tab itself, which is equivalent to stopping the terminal itself. So right there, it warns me that there are still processes running. In this case, the process it is referring to is the SSH client, because my computer is not aware of what I'm doing on the Power server. So when it says there's still a process running, it is referring to the SSH client program that I used to connect to the Power server. So I'm going to close it anyway, like so, and then we're going to open up a new tab. But before we do that, before we sign into the Power server again, I want to test to see whether this script is still running or not. So I'm going to refresh it, and it complains right away that server is unavailable because that port is no longer being served. So it's not just the delay that that's going to cause the problem. The delay is still accept with the delay. While the app is running, it was still accepting the request, and that's why the browser did not complain right away. But in this case, the browser was trying to get to the server, and because the app is not even running, the request itself is not accepted. So as a result, I get a service unavailable right away. So now I get back to my terminal and I sign back in to my account, and then we go to the express.debug folder. Alright, so once again, we can use Pm2 status, and it confirms that only my production app is running. The sandbox app is not running. So now you have a choice, okay, depending on your habit, depending on restrictions, on your own computer. If you think, when you close the terminal and the node program, the express program terminating at the same time is inconvenient, then you can use Pm2, even for the sandbox. So that's up to you. You have to choose which way works better for you. For some people, such as most people in my household, they keep their computer up and running 24/7. Okay, so to my son, it's not going to be an issue to maintain that SSH connection. On the other hand, if you are working on your program using a laptop computer and you have to close it, go to another location, use it again, and so on, that means you cannot really keep an SSH session going all the time. Or if you're on a desktop computer and it's not very energy efficient, and you don't want to be using like 50 watts of power at least all the time, and you want to shut down the computer when you're not using it, that means the SSH session would also terminate when you shut down your own component. I mean, when you turn off your own computer. So, given those are some of the restrictions, and if you really want your sandbox to be up and running all the time, then you have to use Pm2. So Pm2 is a mechanism by which we can start the app, but it won't terminate even when you exit from the SSH. So I'm going to do a Pm2 start, and the easiest way to use Pm2 is just to say start and then the name of the script. So in this case it's mdb test sync. Oh, actually no, it's not mdb. This time it is app async wait. Async wait. So this is the one that has a 3-second delay, and then it says, got you sweating. Okay, so that's the app that I'm starting again. Okay, so and it complains, current process list is not synchronized with saved list. So what saving is going to do is to have Pm2 tracking, basically what app you have been running, and I'm not 100% sure, what that is going to buy you across a reboot of the entire power server. But you can always, go ahead and save it. I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that, doing this will have it automatically restart. I will check later on. But the point is, I can now sign off. Okay, so I'm going to sign off. Control D on the keyboard, or typing log out or exit is going to sign out of your PuTTY session. In the case of PuTTY, if you do this, the PuTTY terminal itself or the PuTTY window itself would actually go away. But since I'm using the command line SSH client, it just kind of goes back to my own machine without closing the terminal itself. So now I go back to my page and refresh it. And we can see that it's still running because it's giving me the 3-second delay, and then it prints got you sweating. Okay, so I have just illustrated, the difference between using Node directly to start your app versus using Pm2 to start your app. If you use Node to start your app, when you terminate the SSH session, when you terminate the shell, basically that started Node, it would also terminate your app, which may or may not be what you want to do. Okay, because if you're doing the sandbox thing, you may not want to keep the sandbox up and running after you have signed off of the power server, because you probably wouldn't be actively working on the script anymore in that case. On the other hand, for the production one, you might want to keep it up and running because that's used for grading purposes. So you might want to keep it up and running so that I can grade it. Now, if your app is not up and running, this is not a big class, I can always go onto the power server and check, okay, because I can sign in. Okay, it's gonna sound creepy, but I can sign in as you, okay, so that I can start your app if I need to. So it's not a huge deal, okay, but it would be much more convenient for me if I don't have to do that. So what we'll do now is to go back into the server, and Pm2 status this time will definitely show that I have both the sandbox and also the production up and running, because the sandbox is running this particular app. Okay, and I don't want to reboot the computer because that way all of your apps are going to terminate too. So I'm not going to reboot the computer. I'm just going to you know delete that particular process from Pm2 explicitly. So we're going to do a Pm2 delete, and the ID is 1. You can also use the name, but in this case the ID is a whole lot easier to type, so I'm just using the ID. And then we can do a Pm2 save, so that Pm2 is not complaining about that. Alright, so now I want to talk about how do you keep something up and running even across reboots. Okay, and I'm not really sure whether Pm2 save is automatically going to do that or not. Okay, so that's one thing I'm not really sure. I can look it up. But the first thing I'm going to check is a very surefire way to to restart your app after a reboot. And the command to use is called crontab. Cron, C-R-O-N, is the name of a daemon. A daemon is basically a program in execution, but it doesn't have any input-output through the terminal. So that's what we call a daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N. So cron is a daemon sitting in the background, and its only task is to look up, quote unquote, a calendar. I shouldn't say a calendar because it actually looks up multiple calendars, okay, plural, when it needs to run which particular program, which command. In other words, it's basically Google Calendar, but for a server or a computer, because you can actually do it in any installation of Linux. So cron tab-e, the tab is table. So cron table is basically a command to show you what you already have. Actually, it's taking the input from the command line, so I can do it -L. It lists things. So in this case, I have set up my cron tab already so that it would actually run Express by itself after a reboot. So I'm almost 100% convinced, 99.9% convinced that Pm2 cannot restart your app after a reboot. In my case, Express got restarted only because I got this cron tab entry. So let me show you how you can set up yours. Okay, so we'll go to cd. We'll use cron tab. Okay, and then with a -E. The command that I used earlier was cron tab-L, which is just listing on the console, and -E is gonna it will let you edit the table. So when you press the enter key the first time, it's going to ask you what editor do you want to use to edit the cron table. And you probably will get a list of choices like Vim, VI, and Nano, and also NVim. So choose Nano unless you are familiar with VI. And then you just have to scroll all the way down until you get to the last line. And your last line should look something like this, not exactly the same, because what app you want to start is going to be specified here. So you want to, so if your production app is just app.js, change that to just app.js. But you also want to remember to do a CD first, because otherwise PM start doesn't understand where your app is located. So it is important to do a CD express, which is the folder where you keep your production app, and then with a semicolon, and then you specify Pm2 start, which is what you need in order to start an app in Pm2, and then you do whatever you need to start that app. Now, if you are in the process of debugging, and you are saying, okay, I want to keep the possibility to debug my production app, okay, because the only thing you don't want to do with your production app is to change it, okay, but it doesn't mean that you cannot kind of debug it. It's still going to be a little issue, if it has breakpoints in when I grade your app, and it's not up and running, but it's a minor issue in that case. So you can also, specify, in this case, -- I think it's a node args. Basically, these are arguments that are going to be passed on to the node command to start the actual script, and then you can now specify dash dash inspect equals to localhost colon, and then whatever the port number you're supposed to be using. In my case, it's 9320, and then followed by the actual name of the app. And if you want to be fancy, you can also give it a name. So you can say your name is production app. So now, with this much longer command, we are still restarting the app itself, except it's going to have the option of allowing me to connect to it with a inspector client, so I can do some debugging. And also at the same time, it's going to have the name of production app. But all of these are optional. As far as your production app is concerned, most of the time, you probably don't need to start the inspector server, so you can keep your command as short as possible, kind of like this, possibly with dash dash name. So this way it is easier just looking at the name of your app, whether it's the production or whether it's the sandbox. But this part is also completely optional to you. When you're all done, just save the file and exit as with any other file. So in this case, just type Control X to exit, and it will automatically ask you whether you want to save the buffer or not. And the answer is yes in this case. And then press the Enter key. Now this is a file that you probably won't recognize because it's a temporary file that crontab is using to capture your input. So don't worry if you don't recognize the path of this particular file. Press the Enter key, and now we have saved the entry. So from now on, whenever the Power Server reboots, it will automatically restart your production app. You can add another entry for your sandbox app if you think that is appropriate. I personally think that because it's a sandbox app, which means you're still debugging it, so that means you may not want to automatically restart it because it's not, unless you're actively debugging it and changing it. It doesn't seem to make sense to keep the sandbox app up and running. Now, it doesn't really take up a whole lot of resources on the Power Server, so if that is what you want to do, you can do that too. So you can go back to crontab-E, scroll all the way down, and repeat this line with your sandbox app. Okay, basically the same thing, except with your sandbox app, you probably want to enable the inspector server when you start the app. So there you go. So this is a really handy way that works on just about any Linux, probably Mac OS X system, to restart an app upon reboot. And it doesn't need you to sign in, doesn't need you to do this manually. It just gets it done. So it's a pretty convenient way to make sure that your production app stays up and running all the time, even across reboots. So I hope you find this short video helpful, especially for people who got frustrated when the system reboots that your app is no longer running. All right, so one more thing. So that one more thing is I want to emphasize that I did not reboot the Power Server. The Power Server is technically managed by ARCIT, and they also have the password to sign in as administrator. And most importantly, they run the virtual machine. So even if I don't give them the password of the administrator account, remotely they can just reboot the virtual machine without letting me know or without asking me and go like, Tech, do you think this is a good time to reboot the server? I have no control over when the server is going to be rebooted, unfortunately. As far as I can see, the reboot is not because of problems on the Power Server, so probably there are some other reason why it got restarted. Perhaps something got something got installed on the virtual machine server itself, which is on campus. I think it's still inside the IT building, the boat building on campus. Um, Maybe they need to install the package on the Power server for security or for whatever monitoring or for whatever purpose they want to do. But the bottom line is, I really have no control over when the Power server gets rebooted, and as a result, learning how to get your production app up and running after every single reboot is important. This is also something that you might encounter in a production and in a work environment, because you may not have control over when the server gets rebooted, but using this particular technique, you can always at least make sure that your app gets restarted after a reboot. Okay, so that's all I need to say for this segment, and I'm going back to writing up the new lab that's going to use a database within the Express context. So you really want to read up on how to enable the use of await in Express, which is one particular module. I talked about that yesterday, and also how to make use of MySQL dash await, which is a node module that allows you to use MySQL um, access that will also support await. So this way, we set up the whole framework to be able to use await, which also means now you can write very efficient scripts, but without having to use callbacks or promises, because those two, even though they are concepts that work, they are kind of cumbersome to use, and it breaks up your code into tiny little fragments, which makes it really difficult to figure out the logic. So we want to avoid that in this class. Alright, so I'm going to stop the video, get it uploaded so that you can optionally use cron tab to have your app to restart automatically on the Power server.